All right, we are live, and I usually give it a couple minutes just so everybody can start getting on because they're probably texting admin going, "Where is everybody?
Yeah,
Where are
for
they?"
sure. I'm gonna curious to see. There were some people that said they were gonna hop on, and I'm curious to see if they'll be there.
Yeah, they're texting me.
Okay.
She's like, "Are you going live?" We're live
Yeah, I'm on the site right now, and I'm not seeing us there.
on YouTube.
Yeah, I just went to YouTube to see, and it said no.
Oh, okay. Um,
Seeing us
yeah,
there
I got us.
on YouTube. Yeah, I just went to
I
YouTube.
think we have a delay, which seems to be the
All
way
right.
it is tonight. I had a live stream conference and the words were like craziness. So, oh, there's people logging on. Hi,
Great.
everyone. For those of you just coming on, I'm Kristen with Bookish Pen Pals. I know that I made this public so that way folks on Instagram and TikTok and YouTube can just join in. So we have a couple people in the chat. Hi, Meredith. Welcome. So I'm
Hi,
Kristen with
everybody.
Bookish Pen Pals, and I'm here with Bethany Jacobs. She wrote one of my favorite sci-fi books right now, These Burning Stars. So we're going to give everybody just a minute because I know we were on a couple minutes late. We had some sound issues, which is typical of the internet. So I'm just going to put some of these highs up. Andrea and Ramona and Meredith are part of our
Hi.
admin team.
Hi, admin team.
They're my buddies. They're like family. And I just
That's
got to
good.
meet Andrea. And here's Jamie. She's the founder of our group. So I just got to meet
Hi,
Jamie and
Jamie.
Andrea over the weekend. No, when was it? Yeah, Saturday, because I'm in Massachusetts and they're in Connecticut, and they're just far enough away that it's a couple of, it's almost New York City where they live. So we
Oh,
met
that's
this
fun.
weekend, which is kind of fun. And I was like, you guys got to get on for the live. So
Yeah.
anyway,
I'm in Buffalo, New York, so
oh, so you're not
we're
far from me
I
either.
yeah, yeah. So we've been
Yeah,
here for
East
about
Coast.
5 years.
Oh, nice. So I grew up in Massachusetts and then moved to Arizona for 23 years and then moved back so
Oh,
my son
wow.
could go to college. And our family was here. So I left my parents in Arizona in the sun, in the hot, and came back here. And, my son went to Hampshire College and, now we all are working and I'm a teacher too. So
Yeah,
we have that in common as well.
yeah.
All right.
I'm not a huge fan of the heat, so I don't think I could have made it work in Arizona.
No, I honestly don't know how I did it either. Like we had some days that were 120. No, thank you. I would rather have snow.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. All right. So we're talking about it's your debut novel, These Burning Stars, and it is a sci-fi fantasy space opera. And when I was talking about your book, and I told you before we went live, like when I first read the blurb, I was like, oh, I'm a huge Star Trek, Star Wars fan. Love sci-fi movies. And I read it and I was like, I have to read it. And it's got so much world building and character building and God, the fight scenes are so good. Um, Tell us a little bit about so, when I started talking about this book, people were like, "Well, what's the difference between space opera and, a sci-fi book?" And there is a little
Mm,
bit of a difference, and
mhm.
I didn't realize that it actually relates to some of my favorite, Star Trek and
Yeah.
Star Wars too. So can you tell us a little bit about the book and then what makes These Burning Stars a space opera? Because it just sounds fancy.
Yeah, so These Burning Stars is a story of three women who become embroiled in a cat and mouse chase to control a secret
Mhm.
that threatens the order of the reigning political parties. And as they are chasing each other across the star systems to control this secret, a shared figure from their past is simultaneously hunting them and driving them towards a cataclysm that will have wide-ranging impacts for the politics and survival of these people. It's a story about revenge. It's a story about the after effects of genocide and colonization. It's super queer, and it's about how we contend with our own complicity in corrupt systems.
And there's so many parallels to the world around us.
Yeah, yeah.
Even just going through and really thinking about it, and I was like, "Oh, wow." So, what was your inspiration? Because I know that you were a college professor and that you've taught writing for
Mhm.
sci-fi and creative writing, right? So, what was the inspiration behind this story?
Well, so I've been writing since I was like 7 years old, and the books that I wrote childhood through high school were all fantasy and sci-fi books. And then in my 20s, I was really trying to write like literary fiction or contemporary fiction.
Right.
And in my third and during this time, I was getting my PhD in English. And one of the things that I was studying was women's fiction in the 20th and 21st century, and particularly narratives of resistance and social justice. And I found that the most interesting of these stories were happening in sci-fi or fantasy worlds, at least most interesting to me. So I
Right.
started delving back into my like genre roots. And I started writing science fiction and fantasy again. I wrote two sci-fi books before I turned to this one. And people ask me what inspired it, and honestly, it wasn't inspired by anything. What happened was I was working on a book. It was going really badly. I wasn't having fun, and so
Oh.
I decided to just sit down and free write,
Mhm.
just to see what happened and just to kind of rediscover the fun of writing. And so I wrote a first line that isn't even in the book now, that turned became the beginning of Jen Ironway's story in the book. And it just kind of like took off from there. And I'm someone who always develops my plots and my characters in great detail before I start writing.
Oh.
But in this case, I started doing that afterwards. And I had the
Oh, wow.
idea that I started to shape. And I worked on it for 2 years before it got, and probably over 2 years before it got an agent. Um, and so it was really inspired by my favorite science fiction and fantasy, and it was really
Yeah.
inspired by the political climate of 2018 and 2019. And
Yeah.
so you can see both my influences and the political social moment reflected in the book.
Yeah, and it's got multiple timelines. You're
Hmm.
seeing what's happening from multiple characters. Like, what does
Hmm.
that look like writing process wise? Because, in my mind, because I'm a hugely like visual learner, even as I'm reading, I can see everything like a movie. But there's one scene where June is, because she's a hacker and she's
Hmm.
doing all these things, and I can imagine all of this. And that to me is how your writing must have been because
Hmm.
there's so many layers
Hmm.
happening. So,
Yeah.
did you have like some sort of plan or did you write
Yeah, I
one?
mean, I ended up developing a very intricate plan, very intricate plot outlines, very intricate character graphs. Uh, the way I tend to write in a cycle, though, where I'll start writing. I don't know if cycle is the right word. I'll start writing, then I'll cycle back to the beginning of the book and start again and get a little bit further, and then go back to the beginning and
Ah,
write again and get a little bit further, because as I write, sometimes my stories go rogue and
yeah,
they don't do what I've planned for them to do. And so, unlike some people who can just like keep writing through that, I've really struggled with not being like, well, now I have to go back and fix everything. And so
right.
that process just made the book tighter and tighter every time that I moved through it. And so those complex timelines and storylines and POVs, I did a ton of revising, and the intricacy of all of that was something that just got, it was like layers on a painting almost, where like you start with the sketch and then you do
Right.
some basic color palette and then you do the detail. That's kind of how I write. Like the rough draft makes no sense and is very flat, but by the time I have a book finished, it tends to be very intricate, to the point that I like drive myself crazy because continuity is difficult when you write complex, multi-layered novels, and so um,
Right.
it's yeah.
Eh, honestly, like, I tell people about this book, and I'm like, "You just need to listen to it or read it," because I was telling you before we went live, I was so excited about the story, and then I started and I was like, "Wait, what?" And I've been reading as far as I can remember, and I was the kid underneath, with the
Hmm.
little flashlight under my bed, and I was like, "Wait a minute, I need to go back." And so I listened
Hmm.
to the audio to start me off, and I was like, "Oh."
Hmm. Yeah,
And
the
then the
audiobook is
world
amazing.
started. It is incredible, and,
Yeah, Natalie
like, I
Notta
was
is my narrator.
yeah,
She's one of my favorite narrators, of the books that I read. So I was so
ah,
lucky that she agreed to narrate it. It was really good.
I followed along with the book with the narration because it came alive even more for me, but I found that even in the car, my daughter was really mad at me sometimes because 'cause I'm like, "I'm putting on my book. I'm putting on my book." She's like, "Mom, I haven't read this book. I don't know this book. I don't know who Essek is. I don't understand why she's fighting this one." And she's like, "Why are their names numbers?" And I just love it because and I like that you described it as very queer, and in a way, 'cause as a queer person myself, I read it going, "This sort of should be how the world like it should be." So what I loved
Uh-huh.
about well, and Essek is like this character that you wanna love, you love her, but you better fear her, and you better be your best friend
Mhm.
because she will rip your whole throat open in a second. I loved her, and I didn't realize how
Yeah,
violent she was gonna get in it,
yeah.
and I was like, "What?" Like, your characters are
She
just
evokes she was the most fun to write. Writing her was absolutely just pure devilish fun. But it's been really interesting to me. She evokes strong reactions in people. Like people
yeah,
either are just obsessed with her and love her, or they'll describe her as just, pure unredeemable evil and they don't like her.
yeah,
Some people want to talk about, like, I had some students who read it in at Georgia Tech, and they really wanted to talk about, like, what's the trauma in Essex background that made her
yeah,
this way, and
right.
so people have strong reactions to Essex.
Well, I don't wanna give things away because I know a lot of our listeners will watch this later or listen to it as podcast, but, as I was watching reading her interactions with Six because when they're at the kin school, which Essek also went to, she gives Six a challenge, and then
Mhm.
it ends up to be this big, like, battle between them, but she's the one who started the whole thing.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I was like, "Why is she so mad? She's
Yeah.
so mad." And then she'll do something, I'm like, "Okay, well, she's a badass." And then I'm like, "Oh my god, she's not a badass. She's evil." Like, but you
Yeah.
have to
Mhm.
just love her
Yeah.
because she's so dynamic in that way. And I mean,
Mhm.
honestly, we see that in people around us as well, that they're
Mhm.
complex and you have to peel them open like an onion.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
there was parts that I listened to and I was like, "Oh, this is so good."
I'm so
And then you
glad.
get the whole total polar opposite in Chono.
Mhm.
Um, how did you come up with her character? Because she balances out Essek and she puts up with so much, and I just wanted her to stab her at some points.
Yeah, I mean, for those who haven't read it, what's important to understand about Essek is she's the scion of a very powerful family. And her arc in the story is the definition of fuck around and find out. She
Totally.
lives, she's very impulsive, she's very selfish, she makes decisions on whims and assumes that she will never face consequences for those decisions.
Mhm.
And then when she does face consequences, it pisses her off.
Yep.
So she was, and yet at the same time, she's incredibly charismatic. And a
Yeah.
big thing I was actually exploring with her is the dangers of charisma. And if you want to look
Mm,
at our political moment and political figures, maybe you can think
right.
about what inspired that consideration. Um, but
Yeah.
so then we've got Chono, who is Essex essentially mentee in the sort
Right.
of educational order of this society, is that Essek is a cleric and Chono is training to be a cleric, and she sort of becomes Essek's ward and mentee. And
Right.
because she serves Essek, and because Essek was actually instrumental in getting her out of an abusive situation, she
Right.
she both loves Essek and is complicit in the evil that Essek does. And
Yeah.
when we talk about character, what we often talk about is character foils. So part of how you clarify what one character is you hold them up against a character who's very different, and it puts the differences and the major
Right.
character elements of those two people into sharp relief because they're looking at each other and you can see the difference. And so part of that is a formal choice that I made to make Chono
Right.
um, different from Essek, to sort of throw them into relief. But the main thing I wanted to explore with Chono, and I actually love Chono deeply, even though she's not as flashy as Essek. I
Right.
deeply love her. But what I wanted to explore in her is what do you do when you discover you've been complicit in something evil and you've closed your eyes to really huge problems, and then all of a sudden your
Mm.
eyes are opened, or you're
Right.
forced to recognize that you have been participating in something bad when you knew it was bad, and you finally reach the
Mhm.
point where you can't do that anymore. Um, and so that was kind of the main question that was driving Chono. And since Essek is not self-reflective in that way at all,
No. Not
they
at
end
all.
up being very different people.
Right. And what's interesting too is, you think Chono is so innocent and, she's tough. I mean, she very tough. Um,
Hmm.
and then there's a twist in the story towards the end where you find out that, she's been a big part of this cat and mouse
Hmm.
on the sideline, hiding that from Essex as like a self-preservation and like the
Hmm.
human part of it.
Yeah.
And so that you fall in love with her.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
I even felt bad for Six for a while. I was like, "Oh, like she has this challenge that she was put up to and she's doing it, but they all have this mission anyway." And we haven't really talked about that because they're trying to find this chip for evidence to,
Hmm.
because of genocide. Um and I loved Six for a long time, and that towards the end I was like, "Oh, I can't like you now." But I
Yeah.
still want to, because the ending I was like, "Oh, when is this next book out? Because I need to
Hmm.
know what's gonna happen now."
Yeah.
I just the characters are so complex, and I love that because that's really reflective of the world around us.
Hmm. Yeah.
You might know somebody for this character trait, but until you actually know them and know the backstory and know what they're fighting for in their life,
Hmm.
you don't really know them.
Right. Yeah.
And it's
Yeah,
not
and I
just a
mean,
challenge.
there's no one in this book. Lots of people will talk about how the book is full of morally gray characters, and
Yep.
like I get, we need those kinds of terms to help us talk about literature. I totally get why we love the term
Right.
morally gray, but usually what we actually mean when we say morally gray is complexly human.
Right.
Um, and so like none of the characters in this book is innocent. Many of
No.
them are
Yeah.
victims of brutalization,
Right.
and many of them are fighting for good, but they're not innocent. And I think that is very true of most people in the world, particularly our globalized world now, is that
Right.
it's almost impossible, even if you're really trying to do good in the world, it's almost impossible that you be innocent, um, in the sort of
Mhm.
big sense of. And so in this book, I take that concept, but I make it more extreme in that,
Right.
Six has murdered people, Chono has murdered people, Ethic
Mm.
likes to murder people,
Yeah.
Jun is a hacker and a thief, her
I love her.
girlfriend is a former, you know bad cop.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
I'm not really interested in fiction that it has characters be evil just for that for its own sake. It
Right.
has to serve some kind of narrative purpose, and it has to make sense in the world that it's working in. And so, I didn't just make them violent because it's cool to have fight scenes, even though it is cool to have
Oh,
fight scenes. I was
right.
really trying to explore the ways that the limits of how they use violence to solve their problems, and the ways that that
Mhm.
ends up going off the rails for them.
Definitely. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, one thing they're fighting over really are the resources of this
Hmm.
universe, and we see that now in our world as well.
Hmm. Yeah.
And trying to get retribution for those types of things. But in our political world, we have, people fighting over oil and nuclear power, and they're
Hmm.
fighting over, you know, the same sorts of things. And as I
Right.
was reading, I was thinking, if we didn't have Earth anymore and we were out in space, could these things happen? Totally.
Hmm. Yeah.
Because I think as humans, there's so many complexities to politics,
Yeah.
and you can see those parallels, even
Hmm.
though this book is the worlds are very complex, but you know, there are relationships in the world around us. So I
Hmm.
think it's very relatable too.
Yeah.
Um, what were some of your aha moments in writing it, where the characters either spoke to you or something happened, you were like, "Ah, this is it."
Well, I won't give it away, but the book does have a major twist, and figuring out that twist was an aha moment that made the entire book come together. I had some moments where characters that had been villains became good guys, and characters that had been good guys became villains. And that really became about like
Yeah,
evening out the cast and figuring out,
yeah.
how that would work. And then, I had there were scenes I wrote where I really got down to the heart of who the character was, and that was like revelatory
Mhm.
for me. It was like, I would write this Essex scene, and suddenly it was like, okay, this is what Essex is. She's not a
Yeah.
caricature. Here's what's actually driving her. Or I would write a scene about Chono, and I would realize, you know what, I have to change this thing, this element of Chono, because it makes much more sense and
Right.
is much more rich if we make her this way instead of that way. So the big moments were plot revelations, and then like character revelations.
So some authors and writers, they often say, "Well, the characters speak to me or the world speaks to me." Does that happen as you're writing?
Well, what I will say, and I said to it earlier, is that I write these very detailed plot outlines that create this sort of like puzzle, or maybe house of cards, we might call it. But then often as I write, things will change without my like a plot point will go a different direction, or a character will do
Right.
something that I hadn't planned them to do, and that's just sort of happens in the imaginative work of writing. And so then I'll be like, well, I guess I gotta change my plot now, or I guess I gotta fix this or the other thing. And
Right.
in the when you suddenly realize that a character who was supposed to be a good guy actually has to be a villain, that
Mhm.
changes everything. And so, or when you realize there's a gap in a story, and you can fill that gap by completely changing a specific character and what they do in the book, those revelations only happen as you're writing and revising. So in that sense, yeah, the book speaks to you, because the
Yeah.
process of creating it is a process of revelation about the story that you're actually trying to tell. And
Yeah.
so the story changes as you tell it. And some of that feels like it doesn't even originate with you so much as it becomes this thing laid out before you that you need to put together.
It has to be, like, the best feeling too. Like
When it works, it's a great feeling. When it's not working,
yeah,
you want to bash your head against a wall. But
yeah.
when it comes together, it's fantastic.
What were some of the most frustrating parts of writing it?
Really, the intricacy of the plot, and the number of
Yeah.
times that I had to go back and be like, I this doesn't make sense anymore. There are times with all of my books, I'll have friends who will be like, "Oh, you have a draft that you're sending to your editor. Can I read that draft?" And it's kind of like, "No, because it doesn't make any sense. I'm only sending
Right.
it to my editor because she's going to help me make it make sense."
Right.
There are stages where I would not show drafts to anyone because they would literally read it and it'd be so full of continuity errors and plot holes as to be incomprehensible. And so when the book is at that stage where it's like incomprehensible and I'm trying to make it into something that makes sense, that can be really frustrating to me as someone who wants like everything to be clean and exact and precise. Um,
Right.
and that's just part of my process that I just have to. I'm constantly learning better how to embrace that that is part of my process and that it's okay that that's how I write.
Yeah, I think, when I was in my PhD program, and maybe you experienced it, they make you read the book, is it Bird by Bird? I
Yeah,
forget.
I know that
Ah,
book. Yeah, it's
and
by
it's
Anne Lamott.
and it yes, and it's all about embracing, that someone's gonna tell you this stinks.
Yeah,
And
uh-huh.
it's
Yeah,
okay because you're gonna come out stronger for it. So immediately that's what I thought of. And
yeah.
my PhD is not even, in writing, but that's the first thing I think of as,
Mhm.
even writing
Yeah,
parent emails.
you have to fail. You have to fail
Yeah.
to create anything.
Right.
Like I've heard a couple of writers say over the years that they wrote a book and their first draft was exactly what it became. And I'm sure that does happen to some people,
Right.
but for me, the meat and the pleasure of writing is when you fail and then you fix it. I like to fix it.
Right.
So in order to
Yeah.
fix it, I have to fail. And as a result, I end up creating something that feels much richer and more satisfying to me than if it just like rough draft just worked
Yeah.
right away.
Do you ever leave your writing space and go, where are my people? Like, where's Chono? Do you expect them to like come up behind you because it's so immersive as you're reading? And I would imagine that writing is very similar.
I think about my characters a lot. My wife and I will sometimes, like in random situations, talk about like what would Essex do in X situation. Like, oh,
Yeah.
we're stuck in a drive-through and it's taking 20 minutes to get through the drive-through. Essex would have gone in and killed someone by now.
Yeah.
And like so, like we'll make jokes
Yep.
like that. And then what I find, because like right now I've just finished the rough draft of the third book in the trilogy, which is coming out next year. The sequel is coming out this year. The third one is, so I'm actually very close to being done with the trilogy.
Ah,
And I find as I'm doing that, I have lots of thoughts about what happens next and lots of
right.
imaginings about what will happen to my characters and what's going to. So in that sense, yeah, they're not confined to the book because in my head canon, they have
Right.
pasts that I don't even get to tell you about in the books, and they have futures that may or may not ever be revealed to the readers.
Hmm. Spin-offs.
Yeah, and I have
You
ideas for
know?
spin-offs that I'm
Yeah.
kind of like, well, maybe I'll write those spin-offs someday.
I could easily see this as a series on TV.
Yeah. Yeah.
I really could, and I hope that someone picks it up for you because it would be phenomenal. Like, there's so many plot points, and I'm like, I would watch this obsessively, because
I
there's so
mean,
much about character development that, you can spend episodes on that could be done really well. So,
yeah. I mean, obviously, like, many writers dream of their work being adapted.
yeah,
Certainly, that would be very fun. The thing about an adaptation, whether it's in an audio book or a TV show or a video game or a movie, is that once it's adapted, in many ways, it's out of your hands, right? It
true.
becomes the property. Like as soon as you publish
Yeah,
a book, it's out of your hands because it becomes the property of the
right.
reader, and what the reader brings to it may be very different from what you bring to it, and that doesn't make it
Yeah,
illegitimate. And so, like even when I listened to Natalie Natis's amazing narration of the book, there were choices that she made or ways that certain characters talked where I was like, in my head, that's not how that sounded, or that's not how
Right.
that was. But that's okay because an audiobook is an adaptation and it's
Right.
fascinating to see.
Yeah.
But that means that you can't be too precious about an adaptation. I think, um,
Yeah.
unless the adaptation is just like bad, I don't think there's much I don't think there's much
Right.
value in a writer being like, well, that's not how I wrote it, or that's not how I intended
Yeah.
it. Because when it becomes the somebody else's creative project, it's going to take on a new life. And so, as
Right.
terrified as I am to see what people would do with it, I would also be fascinated to see what a whole other team of creatives would bring to the story.
Right.
So yeah, and we'll see. It's very, very, very rare for books to be
I
adapted. So
I'm gonna be really morbid, but I really wanna see that fight scene with Six and Essex.
I can
I
understand
went
that.
back and I read that part twice, and I was like, "Boy, you're learning a lot about yourself right now, Essex." And I don't think I are you really learning about it? Because
Yeah,
just when you
yeah.
think that maybe something will change, and I'm not saying too much so I don't spoil it, but then it doesn't. And that was
Mhm,
a little shocking to me. I was like, "Wait, what?"
mhm,
Oh, and I went back and I read it again, and I was like, "Whoa, now what?" Because there was still a good part of book left. So,
mhm, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, it's
because
brutal. I mean, it's funny because I, don't engage in violence myself, physical violence myself. I mean, the most I ever did was I did some boxing while I was in my early 20s. Um, but, I there was something I kind of relished the violence in the book. It was a release for me. Some of the
right,
political issues that I was contending with. And like I said, the book is about revenge, and some of that revenge was mine and my own revenge fantasies, which I think is
right,
perfectly okay to have revenge fantasies. It doesn't mean that you're actually going to engage in violence, but a book is
right,
a good place to work out those fantasies because you're not constrained by the fact that
right,
you don't know how to use a sword. And so,
right.
yeah.
Ah, I just thinking about that scene. I'm gonna have to go reread it again after. But, also, like, there's some great parts where there's fighting and you see those characters in such a human way and their love and like Lisa and Juno, like I mean
Mhm.
in June. Like one thinks the other is dead and they're not, and they come back and they're saving each other. And those are battles I think we fight in our brains.
Yeah,
Only this is now rather than just in our brains. These are actual like situations in the book where, they're working to get back at something really serious and you're like,
yeah,
"Ah, I love them." And
yeah,
I can't yeah, I love them. And
yeah.
also, I used to play, I think it was Mech Warrior back way back. I just dated myself because I think it was like in the 90s. And there's the war, I think it's called the War Horse, where they get on it,
Mm,
like the
yeah, mhm.
mechanical,
Yeah, it's like
I could
essentially a hovering motorcycle.
yeah, but in
Yeah.
my brain, it was this big mech, like machine thing, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, they're all gonna think they're, like, dead and they're gonna get caught." It was brilliant. Anyway, I could go on. Um, so if you could be any one of your characters and switch spots with them, who would you wanna be?
Oh god, I mean, I don't wanna be any of them because like, literally any of them because, like, their lives are horrible and they suffer so much.
I do. I
In
know.
terms of, like, the character that I think I'm the most like, I think is Chono.
Mm,
Um, but the character who I admire the most and wish the most that I was, is Lise. Um,
mm,
Jin's lover, Lise. She's the
nice.
one I have a deep she's very special to me for some personal reasons. And I have like a deep respect for her that only grows as the series continues.
I can't wait, I can't wait. I don't know which one I'd wanna be. I
Yeah,
don't think I'd wanna I don't know. I thought about that
yeah.
when I was writing the question, and I'm like, "What would
Ooh,
I an I don't know."
here's a good question. Who would you most like to have coffee with?
Oh, Essek. She
Really?
would be like, oh, she would like twist my brain, and I'd be like, wait, what did I just say? I don't know. I think I'd want to sit down with all of them,
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
because each part of them, like they each have this part you can relate to. Like you can find
Mhm,
yourself in a little piece of them. And so
mhm.
I'd want to pick their brains. That's a really great question. I'm going to have to really think about that, especially going into book 2 and 3, because
Yeah,
there's some big twists. And I, hmm, I don't
yeah,
know.
yeah.
That's
It's a
hard.
fun question.
Yeah. Um, did we know that in the editing process, in the publishing process, our editors are like, you need to take this out. People aren't going to get it, or you need to add this in. Are there any aspects of the book that you either had to fight to keep in, or you were like, yeah, no, I'm not putting that in?
No, I've been incredibly lucky. I've had two editors at this point. The editor who bought it, Priyanka Krishnan, who was the editor of the first book, and she's just brilliant. And then the editor of the second book has been my current editor, Tiana Koven. And neither of them has wanted me to do anything that I didn't believe in. In fact, I credit Tiana with she read the rough draft of the second book and she came back to me and was like, there's a POV that you're missing. You
Mm,
need to have this character's POV in your book. And I was kind of like, oh my God, you're right. And putting that character's POV in the book really transformed the book and and fixed a lot of what the problems in it were. And so I've been very fortunate that I haven't had at any point with anyone, my
that's
agents,
great.
my editors, my copy editors, nobody has come to me and said, we want you to get rid of this or we want you to add this, and me feel like, no, I don't want to do that. Like they've only made my work better.
That's fantastic. So on the cover, and I'm going to pull it
Mm,
up so that way. Um, so I, in my brain, can the silhouette is all of them.
mm.
So who is it supposed to be? And is it on purpose that I could like the reader is going to think, oh wait, that that's like, no, it's
So
not. That's Chono. No,
So
yeah.
as far as my understanding and what the art team and I discussed, there wasn't a specific one of them that it
Mm,
was supposed to be. I think of it as Essek, um,
yeah,
but but I really think it could be any of them. And I don't think it has to be that you have to think like, oh, this is a depiction
right.
of this one. The cover of the second book is 100% referring to a specific character. And the cover of the third book, when we get to it, I want the silhouette to refer to a specific character. But the first book, we weren't as concerned about that as we
Right.
were with making sure that it was a cover that both evoked the adventure of space opera and the deep character centeredness of the book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty great because like as you're reading, you're like, oh, that's Essek. And it's not. It's really reflective of all of them. And I can totally see
Hmm.
that. Because I
Yeah.
questioned it many times and I'm like, I think that's great that it's up to the reader to decide who's
Hmm.
the
Yeah.
strong figure on the front, because at some point, all four of them,
Hmm.
and well, and I mean, really, if you're counting these two, that's five, are strong and are important and are not strong sometimes and that are
Uh-huh.
equally important. So I found that very clever.
Yeah.
How long did the whole process take from you started drafting till publishing?
Oh my gosh. So I started drafting in 2018. Um, in 2019, I had a friend uh, who said, hey, I have a friend. He's giving away free critiques of the first three chapters of a book. I told him about you. Would you like to give him your book? And his name was Mike Mame. And he's a writer of military sci-fi, whose book series that started with his book Planet Side has been very successful. And so I sent him the first three chapters, and in my mind, I was thinking, like, this isn't that good, but let's just see what he thinks. And he actually came back and thought it was incredible, which was the first time someone had said that to me, that someone had read any of it and said, "No, you're on to it now. This is good."
Yeah.
And he said, "Look, you can either take this to the literary agent market now as it is, or you can submit it to this mentorship program called Pitch Wars."
Mm,
And basically, what Pitch Wars did, it's not around anymore, sadly, but what it did was it hooked authors up with a mentor. They would work on the book together for like 4 months, revise, rewrite, whatever.
right.
And then after that period was done, the author would have access to an agent showcase where a bunch of literary agents would come to that showcase. They would read the blurb of the book, and then they'd have the opportunity to say, "Yeah, I want to read this." And through that showcase, Mike actually ended up so I got multiple agents wanted to see my book as a result of that whole thing that was going on. And I got multiple offers from agents on the book. And then one of the agents who didn't find me through the showcase but found me through Mike Mame, Bridget Smith, she was the one who I picked to be my agent.
Right.
It was very, yeah, it was both very difficult and very easy. It was very difficult in that all of the agents I spoke to were incredible, and I could see myself,
Right.
being happy with anyone. And it was also very easy because I felt right away that Bridget was the right fit for the book. So then she and I worked on it a little. So this is now spring 2020. We worked on it for a little bit. In late 2020, we sold it to Priyanka Krishnan at Orbit. Was it 2020 or was it 2021? I think it was actually, yeah. It's so long ago now. I started writing the book in 2018. I got my agent in 2021. I got my book deal in late 2021. And then we published the
Wow.
first book in late 2023.
Right.
So from
I feel
2018 to 2023, 5 years essentially that I was working on it before it was
oh, wow.
published. Conversely, book
Yeah.
two, I worked on the publishing schedule has been less than 2 years from when I started writing it to when it will be
Oh,
published.
wow.
And book three, it will, from the time I started writing it to the time I'll be done with my draft, it will probably be just a year. So things accelerated
Yeah.
pretty rapidly after I got the deal for the trilogy.
As I find books and, even when we're recommending in our group, I'm finding that Orbit is picking up so many wonderful women authors
Yeah,
and and supporting them and really pushing them. And anytime I see Orbit books, I'm like, okay, I want to look at that.
yeah,
They it's just in my brain now.
yeah.
Um,
Orbit is publishing some of the greatest sci-fi and fantasy writers, women
yeah.
writers of our age. They've got Anne Leckie, they've got N.K. Jemisin,
Hmm.
um, they've got Tasha Suri, they've got Megan O'Keefe. Uh, so yeah, I'm in
Okay.
great company
It's
right now.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Um, so when there's a question in the chat too, and I'll bring that up in a
Okay.
minute. I'm not ignoring the chat. That question is actually in my list, so I was just waiting for it. Um, so when you were a child, what were some of the genres that you read the most? And was there any book that you reread and read and reread again?
So sci-fi and fantasy were
Okay.
my main influences. Uh, there was a book called Confessions of Charlotte Doyle, which
Oh, I love this book.
was historical fantasy, or was
Yep.
historical fiction. So I did
Yep.
also read some historical adventure
Yeah.
fiction.
Yeah.
I was a big reader of Madeline Langle's Wrinkle in Time books. I
One
was a
time.
huge reader of Brian Jakes's Redwall books. The first book I ever wrote at like the age of 8 was fan fiction for Chronicles of Narnia.
Oh, I love that.
So there were a lot of literary classics that all tended to be in
Yeah.
the realm of fantasy and adventure and science fiction. Um, And those were also like the movies and the TV shows that I was drawn to.
Right.
We're in the
Yeah.
same realm. Like Star Trek was a big thing for me growing up. The Explorers was a movie that had a huge influence on me. The
Yeah.
Navigator was a movie that had a huge influence on me. And then when I got into my teen years, I think two of the biggest influences on me were Xena Warrior Princess,
Of
which
course.
I still think is one of the greatest TV shows of all time, and
Of
The
course.
X-Files. Um,
Yep.
so yeah.
Yeah.
So there's really been and throughout all I'm a my I've read very widely. So throughout all this
Right.
time, I was not exclusively reading genre fiction. But when I think about the texts that like changed me, most pretty much all of them were in some way
Right.
sci-fi and fantasy, or sometimes
Yeah.
both.
Charlotte Doyle, I teach with in class.
Really? Oh, God,
I taught 3rd graders for I've taught
it's a yeah,
everything from K-5, but I love 3rd, 4th, and 5th, and when I taught
yeah,
5th, we used Charlotte Doyle. I had 3rd graders this year,
yeah. Have
that
you ever
they
taught
read.
Rosemary Sutcliffe's books?
No,
Rosemary Sutcliffe also writes historical adventure fiction. Um,
I'll have to look for those.
really, really fantastic stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, and I love Charlotte Doyle because it's strong female main character
Mhm.
who is young,
Mhm.
that takes on and comes out in the end the victor, you
Yeah.
know?
Mhm. Yeah.
And so when I have my 8 and 9-year-olds in front of me reading this book that is they clearly read some of them read at college level, and they're reading this
Mhm.
book, um, it she's a great role model for them, and she's a
She is.
badass too for
Yeah, she's
historical
a complete
fiction.
badass. Yeah, she's
Total.
amazing. It's
Yeah.
it yeah.
My kids
Yes.
read it and they're like, "What? She's 13." And I'm like,
Yeah,
"I know, keep reading." And they get super
I know.
excited because not
There's
everybody knows about Avi. So
yeah, there's a lot of really great fiction in that
there
like
there
that.
is.
Yeah.
And
So, yeah.
um have you read The Storm Thief by Chris Wooding?
I haven't. The Storm
Oh,
Thief.
Storm Thief,
Okay.
Chris Wooding. It is one of my favorite sci-fi fantasies as well that I often
Interesting.
teach with. And my daughter's going to middle school this year and she just read it and she's like, "Mom, I don't know why you love this book." And I'm like, "I love this book." And then she got to the middle and
I'm
she went, "Okay, I get it. I get it now."
I'm literally
I
looking
thought
it up on Amazon right now so that I
so
don't forget it.
I just went to Book Barn in Niantic, Connecticut over the weekend, and I found a copy of it, which it's very hard to get, um,
Really.
in real a hardcover in really good shape.
Yeah.
I still have like a library binding copy, but I found one almost perfect condition for
Wow.
$4, and I was
That's
like,
amazing.
"Yes, it's Storm Thief." So there's my recommendation for you.
Great.
When people ask you, "Okay, what is your book recommendation?" Most people have a couple that they say, "You have to read this book." Do you have any of
Oh my
those?
God. Yeah, so you have to read N.K. Jemison's The 100,000 Kingdoms. Um, you have to read Anne Leckie's Ancillary Justice. You have to read Rivers Solomon's An Unkindness of Ghosts. Um, I mean, there's so many that come to mind that now I'm struggling to remember. We're in this just amazing renaissance of queer, trans, and women writers and writers of color
Mhm.
right now.
Yeah.
Yoonha Lee, Neon Yang are incredible. Like I said before, Tasha Suri isn't really amazing. Fonda Lee is amazing. Um, I could just go on and on about the authors
Yeah.
who are writing right now who I just deeply, deeply admire, and friends that I've made like Ren Hutchins and Rebecca Framenau. Rebecca Framenau's just come out with a book called Lady Eve's Last Con, which is
Mm.
essentially a sci-fi heist romantic comedy, and it's just
How
it's just
fun.
absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
So I'm fortunate to count myself among some really good company in current queer women and um, uh, and um, trans writers and things like that. So
How much downtime do you have to actually read for fun?
so when I'm writing, I have no time to read for fun.
Right.
So what I do is I listen to audiobooks because I can listen to
Right.
the audiobooks while I'm doing chores, while I'm cooking, and while I'm at the
Mhm.
gym and while I'm driving places. So the
Right.
vast majority of the reading that I do when I'm in the middle of drafting is um is through audiobooks. Like that's how I read.
Right.
Um and then every once in a while I'll find a way to like make time for another book. When I'm not drafting, um I am usually reading a couple of books at a time. I'll have an audiobook and then I'll have a
Mhm.
physical book. Um, right now, I'm reading The Saint of Bright Doors, and I'm also reading the first Stephen King novel that I've ever read. I'm reading Salem's Lot. So, uh,
Oh,
really
yeah.
very different styles and genres and things like that. I've really gotten into horror in the past couple of years.
Mm.
There's another book that I'm working on right now that's kind of a horror novel. So I've
Oh,
been
wow.
dipping my toes into more horror writers as well. So
That's pretty awesome. So, and that was actually Meredith's question. What are some
okay,
books that inspire you and some of your favorite books of all time? And so we touched on
yeah,
that a little bit too.
yeah,
So,
Thanks,
um,
Meredith.
sorry I took so long, Meredith. And Craig has a question too, but I'm going to get to that one in just a minute. So, our group, and I know that there's listeners and viewers from different groups and, on Instagram and various places, but our group, Bookish Pen Pals, is a pen pal group that we all talk about
hmm
books and reading. And typically when somebody new joins, you write an introduction letter for whoever you click with. So you ready?
Yeah,
What do you think Essex intro letter would be if she were to be someone's pen pal?
she wouldn't bother. And I that sounds like a cop out, but Essex would have no
You're right.
interest in being anybody's pen pal. Essex,
Yep.
pen pals implies an equality in relationships, right? It
True,
implies that
yeah.
I'm interested in what you
Yeah.
have to say. Essex
Yep,
only believes that you should be interested in what she has to say.
yep.
So unfortunately, Essex, not to be a cop out, but Essex
Yep.
would not join a book club
So
or
very
be a pen
often
pal.
we're always like exchanging bookmarks or cool things we
Uh
find,
huh.
and we have like gifting days. We do all this stuff. I would
Yeah.
imagine that Essie would be like dropping, a bloody knife in there.
Yeah,
She'd be
uh-huh.
writing and there'd be blood smeared on it, or
Yeah,
whatever. There's this
yeah.
chip they're looking for, and she'd be like, hold on to this, and if you lose it, I'll kill you. Like that kind of stuff.
Yes,
That's what I would
yes,
imagine.
absolutely, yeah, and one of
We
the
get this
things about
thing. Ooh.
well, and Ethic is so fickle too that she can
Mhm.
also like have random acts of generosity and kindness that are not kind or generous. They're just like
Right.
her caprices. And so she
Yeah.
might also send you like a huge check just because she thinks it'd be funny to see what you do with it.
Right.
So yeah,
Yeah.
she would be a weird person to interact with on any kind of interpersonal level.
I think it would be so fun.
Yeah.
So, now on the opposite of that, what do you think Chono's letter would say?
Chono's letter would be about like would be full of deep intellectual curiosity and
Mm,
the desire to make a real human connection. Chono is essentially a priest, and where she finds her redemption is in caring for people and
right.
actually like ministering to people who are her parishioners and things like that, or even if they're not her parishioners. She has a very deep sense of justice.
Right.
She's a solitary person. She doesn't really have any close friends, but she deeply loves and is protective of her people. And so
Mm.
I would imagine that any correspondence with her, so long as she knows you're not an asshole and
Yep.
so long as you're not another cleric
Yeah.
or another bad guy, would be
Right.
full of compassion and deep human desire for connection.
Yeah. I would love to be her pen pal.
Yeah,
Because I love those long letters where we're talking about everything in life.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so I want to bring up Craig's comment and question. And
Oh,
he
thank
says,
you,
These
Craig.
Burning Stars was my favorite book of 2023. Looking forward to the next in the series. Wondering if you know if Inkstone will be releasing a special edition.
Um, so I think so. They I don't even know if I should be saying this. I was told I'm told that they are. Um, I haven't had like the final confirmation, but I believe that there is going to be an
Mm,
Inkstone edition. Yeah. The
soon.
first one was gorgeous. Yeah, the first one was gorgeous. So I really hope that they do the sequel as well. It'd be great to have hardcovers of all three.
I don't know if you can see, but I'm all about the special editions and the
Yeah,
signed copies.
yeah, uh-huh.
Like like I have 3 shelves just of signed copies because
Yeah,
like
yeah.
I admire authors so much that I find like they're if anybody touches my signed books, I'm like, no, 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 we don't read those. We don't read those.
Yeah,
We read this one.
yeah, uh-huh. Yeah, those ones are special. Yeah,
Yep.
no, I know exactly what you mean.
Same with
But yeah, it was
annotating. Yeah, I
yeah,
won't annotate a hardcover.
absolutely. It's a very personal thing when you change a
Mhm.
book,
Yeah.
in any way. So yeah, yeah.
Are you a dog ear page reader? Do you dog ear your pages as you read or
Yeah,
bookmark them?
I dog ear. Usually probably because I if I have bookmarks, I lose them. So I don't even try to have
Yep.
bookmarks because I would just lose them. I just dog ear.
Yeah.
And I have a friend who was telling me about her girlfriend just destroys the books because she's like a real outdoors person. So these books have
Uh-huh.
like fallen in campfires and fallen in
Right.
rivers and she said to me that she was embarrassed for me to see what her girlfriend had done to the book because it was just
Right.
destroyed. And I was like, no, that makes me so happy. Like a book
Yeah.
that looks lived in makes me so
Right.
happy. So
Yeah.
yeah, so I'm all about dog earing and annotations
That's
and
funny. My
coffee
partner does
spills
the
and
same thing. Yeah.
yeah,
We took a quilting class not that long ago. We started making book sleeves to kind of protect some of the books. And
cool.
she just said to me yesterday, "Can you make me a hardcover one? I spilled coffee all over it." Or it was the rain or something. Might
Yeah,
have
uh-huh.
might have been the rain. And I was like, "Well, what happened to your book?" And she's like, "Don't ask." Because that,
Yeah,
when you have a Jeep and, you're taking it to work and, whatever, that
yeah,
happens. I've never been afraid of dog earring. To me, it shows love of the book. So same
yeah,
with writing
for
in it.
sure.
I write in them
Agreed.
as well. So tell us about On Vicious Worlds because it comes out October 15th, which is not soon enough. But although it is kind of soon because, school starts for me in a couple weeks. So
Yeah, it's like 3 months away ish. I
yeah.
think. Yeah,
So
it's 3 months away.
what can you tell us about it?
So what I can tell you about On Vicious Worlds is that it's set in two places. In one of the places that it's set is in the Treble. Six and
Mhm.
Chono return to the Treble with the intention of trying to gain more justice for the Jeveni.
Right.
I'm realizing that I'm like giving away spoilers as I say this. So if you read the book, they're still worth it, even if you know these things. Um, and the second book is set. I'm not going to tell you where the second book is set in case people haven't read it. But basically, there's two groups of people who are trying to protect their people and restore justice. And
Mm.
as they're doing that, the political situation in the Treble has changed dramatically. And so now they are contending with a new political regime
Mhm.
that is sparking revolutions and rebellions across the star system. And they are crucial players in what's going to happen
Mm.
as a result of that upheaval. Um, it's got. I will say that one of the things about a sequel is that it usually greatly expands on the world of the first book. And
Right.
so the first book is very much in its own lane, even though they're traveling all over the solar system. It's a fairly
Right.
contained story. That story gets broader
Oh.
in the sequel. There are more characters in the sequel.
Oh, wow.
Minor
Yeah.
characters in the first book become major characters in the sequel. And so it's really what you'll see in the sequel is a broadening of the world building. You'll see a heightening of the stakes, um, and you'll get much deeper insight into the characters and their backgrounds.
Yeah.
So it's a book that's very different from book one. It's still, a mystery adventure, type
Right.
story, but it's also very different from the first one. And so I almost want to say to readers, like, I think you will love the sequel, but just know that it's not going to be identical in form and structure to the first one,
Right.
because sequels get bigger. They have to. Um,
Right.
and uh, and so um, so that's what I'll say about the sequel. I don't know how satisfying an answer that is, but
I can't wait.
I'm
Mm.
excited to see what people think. It was
Do you
it
have an
was quite a labor to write it, but it ended up being something I'm
yeah.
really proud of.
Do you have an ARC team?
Do I have an art team? So the thing about
I'm
sequels
asking that about myself.
So the thing about sequels is that they don't usually publish arcs for sequels, but you can request access to the book on NetGalley and
Right.
Edelweiss, which are, and
Yes.
so I believe it's available
Oh,
there. I know it's available on Edelweiss. I don't know if it's on NetGalley yet, but
I
I
will
hope
be
that
logging
people
into
will read the advance, get
yeah.
advanced access to it and start to spread the word.
I'm gonna work on that as soon as we're done.
Yeah, yeah,
I just got an Idlewise, account this week. 'Cause I don't
yeah.
know why I've never been sent an ARC through that platform before, and I was like, "How do I
Yeah.
not know about this?" I'm such a book person and
I didn't even know it was on Idlewise until a couple of booksellers reached out to me on Instagram and were like, "Oh my God, we loved book two." And I was like, "How did you get it?" And they're like, "Oh, it's on
yeah.
Idlewise." And so that was delightful to find out that people have gotten
Oh,
access to it.
I'm thrilled. I'm
Yeah.
totally thrilled. I'll
Yeah.
That's my mission tonight.
Awesome.
Forget, like, tucking the kid into bed and all that stuff, and
Yeah.
I can't wait for October, and, Craig said the same thing too, and, thanks for joining us, Craig, too. It's nice to see some new faces in the chat too.
Hi, Craig.
Oc I agree, October cannot come quick enough. So, thank you so much, Bethany, for coming on and talking to us
This has
about
been
the book
so
because,
fun.
I absolutely love these chats, and I hope that after book 2, you'll come back on and
Oh,
talk
I
to
would
me
love
about
to.
it.
I would
So,
love to.
yay.
And
Thank
yeah,
you.
thank you so much. Anybody who wants to follow me, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter under my own
Mhm.
name. You can sign up for my newsletter on my website if you want to.
Yep,
But I'm very approachable, so don't hesitate to approach me if you have questions or anything like that. And this has been great fun.
great. Thank you so much. And if you want to spread the word, go out and get
Yes.
these burning stars. So if you have not read it and you are watching or listening to this, run out and get it because
Hmm.
it's incredible. So
Yeah.
thank you all for listening or watching. We
Hmm.
really appreciate it. Have a great night.
Thanks, everybody. Bye bye.